Thus, emboldened with tea, we move forward. It's so good to hear Beckett. All right. Several years ago, I was in a meeting of parents at the church because we had enrolled our children in the upcoming OWL class. And OWL stands for Our Whole Lives. It's the human sexuality curriculum that our denomination has prepared. And we pulled together along with the UCC congregations. And so we had our teenagers were meeting in one room and the parents were meeting in another room. And I was really surprised because there was a woman there who was not a member of the congregation. That shouldn't surprise me because when you put out really good educational programming, people from the community show up. But what was surprising is I already knew this woman. Our kids were at school together. I don't know how she found out about OWL, but she did. And so we started talking. And we're talking about, OWL, and we're talking about how hard it is to raise teenagers. And then I got kind of brave and evangelical, and I said, while the kids are in class, you're very welcome to come join us at the worship service. How do Unitarians ever get new people? I don't know. And she thanked me, and she declined. She said she probably wasn't going to come because she said, she'd been raised Catholic, and she'd pretty much left all that behind her. And at this point, she really didn't feel the need for religion, and she didn't miss the church, she didn't miss Jesus, she didn't miss the rituals. But she acknowledged that actually sometimes she still missed Mary. She missed having that loving mother part of theology. And that struck me partly because of the purity of her longing and partly because all of a sudden I realized that I had never had Mary in the first place. And like a suddenly jealous child, I immediately shared her longing. I wanted Mary. Okay. It's not as pitiful as all that, but it made me pause, and it made me reflect upon the Marylessness of my religious upbringing. Okay. Remember, I was raised Unitarian Universalist, and I can state when I was growing up, there was no sacred feminine in our church, in our congregation. I was raised in some very strongly, historically humanist congregations. And God, if there was such a thing, was still firmly masculine, and there was just one of him, if there was such a thing. And in some of our, we just didn't even go there. This is because as Unitarian Universalists, we are descended from some really high-starch Protestants. Our puritanical religious ancestors were the folks who stripped away all of the intervening layers of authority and hierarchy that was in Catholicism and the Church of England. There was nothing, when they got done, there was nothing between the individual and the divine, direct access. No saints, no priests. But in doing so, in that process, they somehow managed to keep intact all of the patriarchy while neatly sifting out any feminine saints or powerful women or female theology. It's almost as if they meant to. Meanwhile, Catholicism, with its commitment to being Catholic, meaning open to all, broad-based, all-encompassing, Catholics figured out that if you want to colonize a people theologically, you need to stretch and simply encompass their existing deities. Go ahead, make them saints. So if a people's indigenous religion included a sacred feminine principal figure, Catholicism could recast her as simply an aspect of Mary. This is how, as the church went out into the world, Mary's skin changed. Mary could be brown or black or golden. She became to encompass more indigenous goddesses. Okay? But we, as high-starch Protestants, we didn't get Mary. Yes, I know, she was the mother of God, but she was kind of demoted theologically. She was a key figure. I mean, yeah, we hear about her, but she didn't have much agency. She didn't have any power, and she wasn't a figure to be venerated or worshipped, confided to, or identified with. So this is our Protestant patrimony. And then, as we became Unitarians, when we returned Jesus to being simply a man, not a God, his mother became even less miraculous, less powerful. She faded even more deeply into the backstory. Okay, mind you, I'm not blaming us. Protestants were not the ones who started the whole suppression of the sacred feminine. That began long before. The ancient Hebrews helped to build the patriarchal social structure that shifted power away from any of the earlier goddesses that they had kept around. And they placed everything onto a single masculine deity. Actually, if you look back in the Hebrew scriptures, the deity is kind of both male and female, but guess what? Translations. And then, as the followers of Jesus coalesced into an institutionalized religion, again, there was a suppression of female Christian voices. All right? We've heard about the early Christian desert fathers. Well, they were Christian desert mothers, too. Right? By the time I came along in 1961, we had a good, solid several thousand years of God being a single masculine idea. And for me, as a young woman, this made it just so much easier to reject that God. Because, as some have noted, we create our gods in our own image. And so where was a God like me with frizzy hair, tawny skin, being raised a single child of a single parent? Even in our astonishingly liberal and challenging tradition that has been ordaining women since the 19th century, I mean, even in our theologies, there were no women, not explicitly. So, can you blame me, a teenager, for walking away from that? Okay, luckily for me, and actually for all of us, in the late 1970s, the women of my mother's generation got fed up. Some of us are still fed up. Me too. But back in the late 70s, they got fed up and they began to challenge our Unitarian Universalist assumptions. They demanded to be included. Beginning with the language used in our congregations, in our governance, in our policy, in our hymnals. And at the General Assembly of 1977, our association unanimously passed the Women and Religion Resolution. It's very wordy, because we are people of many words. But among its beautiful words is the urging for us all to examine the sexism inherent in our religious literature. Thus empowered, Some of our women started digging deep into the stories, the old stories, in a search for stories that would speak to their struggles and perhaps to find a God that looked more like them. In their digging, they found the goddesses of other cultures, and they uncovered some of those suppressed stories from the Christian and Hebrew histories. As these stories were found, they were gently brushed off, brought to luster, pondered, and embraced by the women of our movement. And to be honest, the same work was happening in other liberal religious denominations as well. This was happening in the congregations that are liberal rather than literal. Okay. So when this starts, I'm a young adult, but I'm watching it all from the edges. I wasn't quite ready to just dive in and begin worshiping European or African or Native American goddesses. I didn't have the language at the time, but now I do. It felt appropriative. It felt not quite balanced. It kind of like just taking what looks nice but leaving what's icky or inconvenient. Taking the goddesses out of context would be making the same mistake that the patriarchal Hebrews and Christians had made. Because you can't have Freya without Odin. You can't have Hera without Zeus. Okay. And besides, I had just so thoroughly discarded one deity. Why should I go spend time considering others? You know? But because I can change, and you can too, we have permission, I did start exploring the gods and goddesses as aspects of human nature. And yes, I approached the whole thing intellectually, through the lens of Jungian psychology. Right. The researcher, the writer, Jean Shinoda Bolen, wrote 2 really influential books, changed me. Goddesses in Every Woman and Goddesses in Every Man. Anybody read any of those? Okay. She published those in the 1980s. They're still a great read. I highly recommend them. And in it, she takes the Greek pantheon of deities, and she shows how all of these different gods and goddesses can be seen as archetypes of human nature. Wonderful, powerful, but it still felt kind of borrowed to me. I didn't grow up with Demeter, so it felt not quite mine. I still wanted something closer, something indigenous, something internal, something older than the ancients. The full 180 pivot on my non-theism really came during my chaplaincy training. To become a Unitarian Universalist minister, it's expected that the student will do clinical pastoral education chaplaincy training. It really seals the student's theology because they have to learn to be with another person's theology. I did mine at a hospital, the primary indigent care and trauma center hospital in Austin. And in my work there, while looking suffering straight in the eye, I found myself praying deeply for the first time to a great mother. Not Demeter or Gaia or Parvati or Isis. She had no name other than Mother. As I held hands with the people who were in the midst of their loss and their pain, I asked her to move through me, to be with them, and to simply keep me standing. She has no stories other than the ones we make up about her. She has no name than other whatever we might call out in the midst of our joy or despair. She's the ongoing creative force of our own DNA, and she is wisdom in her endless curiosity. So, that's just part of my encounters with the sacred feminine. That's just me. What about you? We were given clear instructions back in 1977 to carefully examine our own religious beliefs and the extent to which these beliefs influence sex role stereotypes. How have you gone about that work? Unpacking the traditional assumptions and what it means for you. Where has it led you? Okay. Now, in case I haven't explained this to you before, I am an apophatic mystic, which means to say I am completely uncertain and I have no words. I have no way to fully define or comprehend the all that is, that I consider holy. But I'm supposed to teach and lead, and so sometimes I have to use words, and so here's how I'm using my words. That longing, that sense of loss, that marylessness that I experienced, I'm working to shift that for the next generation of our children. I want you to know that you'll hear it in the stories that I tell them. In these stories, I'm queering up God by shifting pronouns. In my stories, God might be a he or a she or a they. I might include both a creative mother and father in the creation stories that I make up for our kids. By including a feminine creator, I'm also striving to make creation an everyday process rather than a one-time single grand event. Yeah. There was a big bang, but there's also a sunrise every morning. I want our children to feel that they are connected to both. And perhaps we can all queer up any gods that we might keep around by balancing out their aspects. Okay? The patriarchal monotheism that emphasizes power and control, omnipotence, omniscience. What if your God's most important aspects were patience, curiosity, creativity, that endless experimentation that is DNA? With my words, I'm working to shift our Protestant patrimony to become a tradition that includes the male, the female, and the queer. I don't know how I'm doing. It's a process. But in doing so, I'm coming to realize that the sacred feminine, the power of the goddess, probably has been with us all along. Maybe not with the name of Mary. I'm coming to see that she has been the invisible, emotional counterweight to the intellectual theology of our tradition. She's been the force that was behind our efforts towards creating social justice because her children are not safe until there is justice for all. She's been the power behind our commitment to religious education for both young and old because her children are not living to their fullest potential until they learn how to ask questions and develop their own voices. She's been the powerful welcome that we extend to all who are feeling excluded or shut out by rigid or fearful religions. She's been with us all along because she loves us exactly as we are and as we are becoming. Blessed be.